Before we jump into this week's episode of the Major Pain Podcast, I will remind you that I am not a medical professional. Please do not take any medical action based off what you hear on this podcast without first consulting your doctor. I'll also say that if you are enjoying Major Pain, we would love your support to keep the show going. There are several great ways to do so. The first is our ongoing Patreon campaign. Through Patreon, you can subscribe with monthly financial contributions that directly support this show's creation. We have 3 tiers of support: the $2 per month supporter tier, $7 per month patron tier, and $25 per month producer tier. Each tier comes with different levels of recognition on the podcast itself and gifts when you sign up. Our $7 per month patrons will receive a gift of a Major Pain coaster, and our $25 per month producers receive a Major Pain tote bag, both gifts made by my mom. Everyone who signs up on Patreon will gain access to monthly bonus episodes with myself and my partner Andy, where we talk about what's going on in our lives, updates on our health, and the movies and TV and books we are currently enjoying. You can learn more about our Patreon campaign and sign up to support this podcast at patreon.com/majorpainpodcast. Extra special thank you to our Patreon producers supporting this show at the highest tier of $25 per month: Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Other great ways to support this podcast include clicking our affiliate links, which you can find in the show notes of this and every episode. That includes Rare Patient Voice, an amazing program where you can be paid for your time to participate in research studies and surveys. If you have a diagnosis of any kind or you are a caregiver, you qualify to participate in Rare Patient Voice. Sign up using our link, rarepatientvoice.com/majorpainpodcast. And if you participate in a research study or survey, you will earn an average of $120 per hour for your time. You can also support this show when you sign up for NeuroHealth. NeuroHealth is an online headache and neurology clinic where you can get the care you deserve without the wait. Head to neurohealth.co/majorpain to get a discount and support this podcast when you sign up. Or you can head to our Amazon shop, amazon.com/shop/majorpainpodcast. Our shop features products that I use to manage my chronic illness, and Major Pain will earn a commission on any purchases from this shop. Or you can start any Amazon shopping trip from our shop, go on to Amazon, purchase anything at all, and this podcast will still earn a commission. Follow Major Pain on social media. We are on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast, where you can leave a comment on any episode and interact with other listeners of our growing community. And of course, don't forget to leave Major Pain a positive rating and review wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and most major podcast platforms. This show is intended as a free resource for anyone going through chronic illness and disability, to build community around experiences often lived in isolation, to break down the layers of societal ableism, and to help you navigate for your own personal health equity, and also just have a lot of fun. Thank you for checking out the Major Pain Podcast. Let's get to today's episode.
How lucky it is just to get through a day without pain.
If you look at me, it doesn't appear that I have a disability.
A test that comes back abnormal, it's like, yes, we're onto something here.
Welcome to Major Pain. I'm your host, Jesse Mercury, and this week I'm so excited to be joined by my guest, Danni. Danni, welcome to the podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you today. Let's jump into it, getting to know you. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Danni Hertel, and I am 24 years old. I'm a baker. I live in Houston, Texas. I picked up baking a few years ago as just kind of a hobby, and I made it into a full-time career. And now I get to work with a bunch of really fun celebrities whenever they come in town. I've worked with Steve Aoki and stuff like that. I'm a huge music nerd, so that kind of ties into it. I kind of get to work with some artists I've looked up to for years, which is really, really fun. So I grew up doing graphic art and pop art, obviously. And just, I'm a big music nerd. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd too. So sci-fi and all that stuff is really fun to me. And even though I don't really like the new Star Wars movies, but that's okay.
Wow, we have a lot in common. Oh my God. I'm a huge Star Wars nerd. I'm a huge music nerd, a musician myself.
Oh.
How did you turn baking into a full-time career?
I started doing baking actually whenever I got sick. That's kind of how I got into it. But I started doing it out of my home during COVID, kind of whenever Crumble was really big and people were buying Crumble cookies every week because they changed. And I started kind of doing a copycat recipe to Crumble. And then I entered a cookie contest in the newspaper for Houston, the Houston Chronicle, the very first cookie recipe I ever created on my own. I entered it, and they actually named my cookie the best in the Houston area for that holiday season. And so once my name was in the paper and that recipe was in the paper, I had a ton of people asking me like if I was going to start selling. And I was like, oh, there's an idea here. So I started doing that. And then because I was an artist for so many years, it kind of just translated very well into cake decorating and cupcake decorating. And so I do a lot of custom orders for people. And I don't know, it's my favorite thing in the world. I'm so lucky that like I actually get to do what I love. And I run it right now out of my apartment, but it's kind of outgrowing me a little bit. So I'm looking at other spaces.
Incredible. What an amazing story. It already sounds like there's a little bit of a perk that's come from being chronically ill.
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I was trying to hold that off until later. But
Yeah.
I am a big, everything happens for a reason. And for sure, without one, I wouldn't have the other. So
Yeah.
I was pursuing a psychology major. I was like a year away from graduating with the psychology major. And then this just kind of happened. And now it's this career that I can't wait to keep going with.
Yeah, incredible. And I have to ask, before we jump into your story, what's your favorite Star Wars movie and who is your favorite Star Wars character?
Okay, and this is so divisive, and I tell people that all the time. I'm a huge OG Star Wars fan. I was raised watching them in the order they were released, so I watched the 1970s before the 90s. And therefore, I have some opinions about the prequels, but people don't like my opinions about the prequels. But my favorite one of all time is A New Hope, just because it was so different at the time. I like tell people it's not the greatest movie ever made. It's not by any means. Some of the lines aren't even the best, and some of the stories in there could tweak, but it was so different than anything else at the time that I think it was incredible that George Lucas just kind of dreamt it up, basically, and made it. I mean, I had a crush on Luke Skywalker growing up, but I'm a huge Princess Leia fan. I was her for Halloween a couple years back, obviously. She's just like the most, badass princess in the galaxy. Yeah,
Amazing.
Growing up, I was a C-3PO fan, if that tells you anything about me. I know. That's what everybody says.
I love C-3PO. And I mean, I grew up on the original trilogy, and I was in middle school when the prequels came out. So I'm 40 years old. So I'm from the generation where we grew up with only the original trilogy. There were no prequels. And then the prequels come out, and they're so different, and they were kind of universally hated at the time.
Yeah.
And now there's been this whole generation of people who grew up with the prequels as their first Star Wars and love them and have so much nostalgia around them. And I've been kind of shocked and like taken aback by how much people love the prequels now, because when I grew up, that was not in style at all.
Yeah, that's what I talk about all the time too. That's why I'm like, sometimes my opinions aren't met with the best. I don't know, but people, because I don't like the prequels that much, and a lot of people of my generation do, but I was raised in a house that my dad was like, no, these are the best ones. These aren't the best ones. And my dad wasn't a prequels fan either. And so he was very much so like, we like these, we don't like these. And like 6-year-old me was like, okay, we don't like those.
Well, give your dad a high five for me, because he did a good job.
Yeah, I will definitely. And I always say the best part of the prequels is the last 40 minutes of episode 3, the big fight scene. It's phenomenal cinematography. It really is. But
yeah, there's a lot to like about episode 3. And, I can't deny the nostalgia that I have for episode 1, because, even though I didn't know how to feel about it when it came out, I saw it in theaters 4 times. And it wasn't until it came out on home video and I watched it like the 5th time, I was like, okay, I could admit to myself, I don't like this. I do like the Darth Maul fight at the end, but besides that, I don't like this. But as an adult watching them, all 3 of them again, which I've done a few times, it's like, you know what? There's something quirky and weird about these. And
I have thought that too.
Yeah, they're a part of me. And I have to accept that, even though I don't necessarily like these. And I think that some of the worst dialogue of all time is, all that love scene stuff in episode 2. It's rough, but it's Star Wars, and you got to watch it. You got to love it on some level, Yeah,
that's how I feel about the new ones too, is I like went into it already kind of being like, I don't know about these, but they each have their quirks. Definitely, I used to not be a Jar Jar Binks fan, and I'm still like iffy, but like growing up and kind of watching them back as an adult, I was kind of like, okay, wait, I kind of like, he's kind of funny now as an adult. I kind of get it.
Yeah, and I do love that Ahmed Best, who played Jar Jar Binks, came back in The Mandalorian. That was just like, as a different character, as, this Jedi Master. for that one episode with the flashback with Grogu. Anyway, you're bringing out my my sci-fi podcaster from my past. Let's talk about.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Every time sci-fi comes up on Major Pain, I take us there, and I can't help myself. Let's get to your story. I'm so excited to learn about what you've been through. So, Danni, what is your major pain?
My major pain right now is kind of a mystery. Pretty much, I'm still going through the process of getting diagnosed. But I've been misdiagnosed a million times. I've been diagnosed a million times. But my major pain right now is all central to like my digestive system and my stomach and my abdomen and stuff like that, which I know is super ladylike to talk about on a podcast. I always laugh at that. I've been interviewed before and I'm like, oh my God, I have to talk about like my bowels on TV. And so it always freaks me out, but it's a true part. And I mean, I talk about it so that I make it a little bit more normalized. So I have chronic pain in my stomach pretty much whenever I eat. And it can be related to stress. It's usually right after a stressful situation I have it. We tend to get in flares after our immune system comes down and after our anxiety kind of chills out a little bit. So it could be after a stressful week at work or something stressful in my day-to-day life. It could be based on what I eat randomly in the day. It could be related to my menstrual cycle. It pretty much right now we don't know, but it's just kind of left over from a bad flare that I had a few years ago. But that's my major pain right now. But it knocks me on my butt. It's one of the major pains that you're on your couch bedridden for a day.
Ooh, that sounds awful. I'm already feeling for you because I went undiagnosed and misdiagnosed for so long. And I've lived that for most of my life. And I very much know how incredibly upsetting that is on a daily basis. So I'm already feeling for you on that level. Tell us more about what this feels like. Is it like cramping? Is it, bloating? What is the sensation?
It is kind of a little bit of everything. I deal a lot with, forgot the word for it, but it's whenever you get full very fast after eating something. I can eat like half of the kids' meal and then I'm full. I'll get bloating, and nausea is the really, really big one, as I'm sick to my stomach like 9 times out of 10, which is just annoying as anything. And then pain, it is kind of crampy, but it also, and it's very central to my stomach. I can feel it because your stomach's right below your rib cage, as opposed to, people think your stomach's down below, but it can be like sharp shooting pains where it hurts every time you breathe. They're thinking it might be more of like a nerve thing right now because of the way I'm discussing it. It's not so much crampy as opposed to just sharp shooting pains that last for a couple hours.
Yeah. Tell me about what you've looked into so far as to what it might be.
Oh my goodness. So many things. And that's what I wanted to talk about too, is it's a big part of the chronic illness journey also, is being misdiagnosed and diagnosed and going through testing for years and years and years and years and years. And so I've been tested for everything under the sun. Right now, I'm in the process of getting tested maybe for like endometriosis or fibromyalgia. And endometriosis, they don't really have a good way of diagnosing it that's not a surgery, which is crazy that we haven't advanced in medical enough to do that yet. So they're thinking it might be that. I've been diagnosed officially with polycystic ovarian syndrome, and I've had that since I was younger. And then they call it functional dyspepsia, which is basically IBS, but central to your stomach instead of your bowels. It basically means, my doctor said point blank, he was like, it means something is not working, but we don't know what, which is, IBS is a catch-all for a lot of things. So functional dyspepsia is your stomach is having problems, but we don't know what it is, but it's definitely inflamed. Something is wrong.
Yeah.
And I've had colitis in the past too. Like, I've had everything.
Yeah. The other thing I'm really feeling for you about is the fact that there's a piece of this that it can be flared by anxiety, because I just know from experience that if there's anything that you bring up in a doctor's office that even remotely sounds like anxiety, a lot of doctors immediately shut the door in your face and say, oh, well, it's your anxiety causing this. Is that an experience you've had?
Extremely. And another big one was because this all started when I was 20. And so a female, a young woman walking into a hospital or an ER complaining of stomach pains, the first thing they always think of, oh, it's your cycle, you're pregnant, it has something to do with this. And so I've been tested for pregnancy a million times because they think automatically that's what it is, or anxiety for sure. I wasn't diagnosed with anxiety and depression, all that, until I kind of went through what I went through. And then afterwards was whenever I started feeling more of the mental anguish of still nothing being found out. I'm, thank goodness, on the other side of that. But I've been diagnosed with PTSD as well in relation to all of this, because I started having some health PTSD and I started having eating problems. I've been diagnosed with an avoidant eating disorder because I wasn't able to eat because of all this, because it hurts when I eat, therefore I don't eat. So it's kind of everything. And at the time, whenever I was in the thick of it, as my mom likes to call it, she just said that this morning, when I was in the thick of it, I know that it's flared by anxiety. And so I would get anxious that I wasn't finding answers, and it would get worse. And then I was getting anxious that I wasn't finding answers. So it was just a big snowball until it became this huge thing.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's part of what's so upsetting about being undiagnosed. Especially like, okay, there's something awful going on in your body. It's stressing you out. You go to a doctor, you try to get help. You tell them that it's stressing you out, and they say, oh, well, the fact that you're stressed out is why this is happening. You're like, no.
Yeah, this came first.
Yeah, no, it started first. But a lot of doctors just won't hear you. They will not hear that. And it's just one of the great tragedies of the medical system. And it makes me so upset. And, it still makes me as upset as it did on day one of starting this podcast, coming up on, close to 200 episodes at this point, that I'm still hearing it in almost every episode. It's so frustrating. And, but the solace in it is that we are all going through it. So it's not just you. It's not, I always used to feel like I'm going through this alone. Doctors are telling me that I'm crazy. And then I started to question my own sanity. And then I started to maybe lose my sense of self a little bit and lose this sense of certainty that I knew what was happening in my own body. And, now that I have a diagnosis and things are making sense again, I'm still trying to, regain that sense of self that doctors have taken. And that is at the root of a lot of people's complex medically induced PTSD. Very frustrating situation.
And I didn't really even know that that was something that could have been possible to even have until kind of it was happening to me. I would get like a sniffle and freak out. I would have a panic attack. I would get flashbacks. And so finally, when I saw a therapist, I wasn't aware that PTSD, you could have it outside of having like traumatic events of what you would think of are traumatic events. And the way my therapist said it best was, she was like, PTSD, it doesn't matter how big the event is, it's how your brain reacts to it. That's what PTSD is in general. Especially when your tests come back normal and like that something's not right, and you're like, no, I know my body, something is not right. And doctors are like, everything looks normal, sorry. And you're like, no, but I know I can't eat, something is wrong.
Yeah, totally. It's so depressing when you're looking for answers and the test results keep coming back normal. What sort of tests have you done? Like MRIs? Have you done, like gastric emptying studies? What have they put you through?
Oh my gosh, everything under the sun. And I want to preface this by saying, like, some of it is harder for me to remember, I think, because of my brain's blocked out a lot of it. And because I was so sick and on so many medications in the thick of it, my brain kind of has a hard time remembering some things. So I kind of jump around. I try not to. I've tried to really like lock down a timeline, but I've done every test under the sun. I've done MRIs, I've done CAT scans, ultrasounds, gastric emptying, because they thought maybe it was gastroparesis, which it's not. But that was weird. I had to eat radioactive eggs. And then I got a little note that was like, you're not allowed to fly for the next 3 days because you're radioactive. It was crazy. But yeah, I've done everything. Actually, I just saw a rheumatologist for the first time a few months ago, which was fantastic. I was super excited. And they did a full scan and a full blood work, full autoimmune panel, which was lovely because my mom has an autoimmune disease and so does my sister. And I came back ANA positive, but everything else was normal. So they were just like, sorry,
Wow.
I mean, something might happen in the future, but it's not right now. And they said because I wasn't in a flare and I wasn't sick enough, they couldn't diagnose anything. But I've had ultrasounds and I've had pelvic ultrasounds, I've had transvaginal ultrasounds, I've had every single scan. And I've had so many I've had 2 or 3 colonoscopies. I had to get an emergency one whenever I was in the ER for colitis. They decided they wanted to do like an emergency colonoscopy, which is not fun when you don't know what's coming.
Yeah.
I've done several endoscopies because that's how you look into the stomach because there's nothing in the colonoscopies. So I've done more endoscopies, and it's just everyone says, yeah, it just looks inflamed.
Wow. So frustrating.
Very frustrating.
So in my own journey, I've also had a lot of these tests done. I've had the endoscopy, the colonoscopy, not a good time. I've also had a liver biopsy, and it was a shock to me because when they did that, they're putting a needle into my liver, and it's like right below the rib cage. And that's when I learned where my liver was. And also that there's like all of these organs right there. There's the pancreas, which I've interviewed people with pancreatitis, and I have a close friend with pancreatitis. And that like sort of doubled over in pain sounds a lot like the sort of pancreatitis pain. Have just the location that is hurting, have your doctors done anything to sort of rule out the fact that it could be anything other than the stomach? Because it's all sort of jumbled up right on top of itself right there.
Right. I've had a gallbladder test. They call it a HIDA scan, I think. I've had that one where they put like, they inject it with something and it feels really crazy going through you. And the guy was like, it's going to feel like you're peeing yourself. And I was like, okay, cool. And then it is. It's not my gallbladder. It's functioning properly. Everything is functioning properly. I don't know if I've ever had a pancreas scan. I didn't think about that. But central to where it is, maybe that's something I'll bring up. That's what's going to come from this podcast. I'll talk about it.
Great. And I am not a medical professional. All I know is I'm a professional patient.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like my dad keeps saying, he's like, you just knock at it until something works. Eventually I will come in and you will get tired of hearing from me is what I think about the doctors. But to go back to what you were saying earlier about kind of like gaslighting yourself into thinking like, oh, it is in my head. I was mentioning that I feel like I've kind of like Stockholm syndrome myself sometimes where I haven't, the last couple of times I've been into my doctor, I'm overall doing better, but I still have terrible flare days. And so I feel like I've Stockholm syndrome myself into thinking like this is okay and this is normal, even though you talk to other people and they're like, that's not normal. But in my head, I'm like, this is so much better than it was. This is normal.
Yeah, that's a great point. Normal for you is not normal for someone else. Normal for you is like, oh, I'm doing a little bit better with this abnormal thing that I'm living through. But because it's your life and you only have your body, what's normal for you becomes a different scale. And it's really hard to keep that in perspective. And it's so hard to communicate with doctors, especially when you're coming back in over and over again, complaining of the same thing and they haven't found it. And it sort of becomes this weird game of, knocking on their ego and saying, hey, are you willing to keep looking? And oftentimes the answer is, no, I think this is your fault. I think it's your anxiety. I think that it's just, menstrual cramps or whatever they say it is. Anything that starts with it's just and then has something else after it, it's going to be bad. So
yeah, and I make the joke. The doctor, like a couple times ago, I walked in and he was like, okay, so what's your pain level at today? It's what they always say. And they're like, what's your pain level? And I think it just said, what's your pain level? And I told him, I said, you mean today or like normally? And he kind of looked at me and he was like, okay, so we're going to order blood work. Because I was like, well, I'm not in pain like right now as we speak, but I was yesterday. And so I'm like, you mean my normal pain or not? And I've heard a lot of people that have chronic illness and a lot of women as well. It's kind of like things will go undiagnosed. Like you might, not really food poisoning, but it's like your appendix burst. And to us, we're like, oh, I can withstand this. Like it's just something else that's wrong. It's not my appendix. Don't worry about it. Because you're so used to being in pain all the time that you have like a higher pain tolerance. And so you begin thinking, oh, that's not it. Don't worry about it. And then it's always something bigger.
Yeah. And the things that you have to tell yourself to get through the day, before I had my diagnosis, when I would flare up, I'd be in so much pain and my body was just freaking out and I'm having muscle spasms and brain fog and I'm completely non-functional. And I'd had so many tests come back normal that my doctors told me, whatever's happening is not serious. It's not threatening. It's not harmful. It's not going to kill you. So I started telling myself that. So whenever it would happen, I'd be like, this is just normal for me. This is fine. There's no problem, And little did I know, I have mast cell activation. My body's being flooded with chemicals. I'm getting nerve damage, which we eventually found with my small fiber neuropathy biopsy, where it is harming my body every time it's happening. And I'm telling myself that it's not a big deal. And I'm just, like popping a weed gummy and lying down on the couch for the entirety of the day just to exist and survive, telling myself that this is just my life. This is normal, right? That's not normal. It's not okay.
No, that's exactly. I was kind of flaring last night, and I was freaking out. And my boyfriend was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, no, it's fine. Like this happens all the time." And I was like doubled over in pain, and I'm just kind of sitting there with a heating pad, and I'm like, "I'll just sit here with the heating pad. It's fine. I'll just drink my tea." But yeah, I totally agree. I'm actually having a nerve test in January too, because I'm starting to have some like tingling in some of my nerves, and some of my limbs are kind of starting to fall asleep. And so they were talking about doing nerve testing now to see if that is a problem.
Interesting. Okay. Well, then because I have mast cell activation, I see the world through mast cell activation, which includes all sorts of like reactivity to foods, and it can include stomach issues. Everything else that you've said does not remind me of it, but let's talk about it, because why not? Have you done any sort of like food elimination diet, anything? Do you have weird allergies? Do you have weird skin reactions? Anything like that?
The only major one that I had, I've been lactose intolerant since I was a kid, but when you're a teenager, you can eat anything and it doesn't matter. So I didn't really take it seriously until I was like 14 or 15. And then I cut out dairy just to see how I would feel. And I've been going on almost 10 years of no dairy now. So I've tested. It's not an allergy. I don't have an allergy to any foods. It's just like a high intolerance. But because I've been dairy free for so long, that's not really an issue. It's not a gluten thing. I've been tested for all that. I've done the elimination. I've done the low FODMAP. I've done all of that. And kind of what I'm trying to do now is get back from that, because it was part of kind of what spurred the eating disorder a little bit, as I started being very restrictive about what I can eat and what I can't eat. And it almost made it worse. And so now I'm trying to do the flip side, still not eating dairy, still saying no to ice cream and pizza. But in terms of everything else, just trying to eat everything a little bit at a time. I tend to feel better when I don't eat meat. So that's something that I figured out too, if I get my protein from other sources. But yeah, I've done food eliminations, and I try not to think about it too hard or I get in my head.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's such a good point too, and this is a very real thing that I deal with also, because I have to be on a specific diet for MCAS. I'm on a low histamine diet.
So like no honey or anything, right?
Honey's actually pretty okay. Well, I can't really have sugar, so I have to limit any sugars, including honey. But honey's like if I am gonna have sugar, honey's one of the safer ones. It's nothing fermented, which I hesitate to even tell you about, because what you're talking about food being bad, right? This idea that food is bad, and then it's certain food that is bad. And then if you have a chronic illness,
it's a lot of, I know fiber, like a lot of fiber, like avocados, blueberries, those are not good for my system at all. I was saying that if I want a surefire way to kick off a flare, which is what I was joking, that the next time before I go get blood work, I'm going to flare myself on purpose so that something comes up. Fermented food, though, they say is so good for your stomach. But I've definitely, I know people that have problems with that. Yeah,
well, that's what happened to me. Is I was seeing a naturopath. I was very sick, and I went to this naturopath, and he's like, well, we got to, up your fermented foods. And I just got worse and worse and worse. Histamine grows in food over time. So fermented foods have the highest levels, and my body can't process it. And I will have an MCAS reaction from eating histamine. So then my entire body starts to attack itself. My white blood cells will over-release chemicals into my bloodstream as if I'm having an allergic reaction, even though I'm not allergic. Technically, it's I guess you could say I am. I don't know. It's like a weird gray area. But MCAS and allergies are very interrelated, but different. So it's like an allergen, your body releases all the chemicals to combat the allergen. With MCAS, your body releases all the chemicals because they're bored, There's no reason. And then you get like a hyper flooding of these chemicals, and it can cause like horrible symptoms and very varied symptoms from person to person. Everything you're talking about does not make me feel like you have MCAS. So I don't know why I'm telling you all about it, but
no, I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. There's a huge wide variety of chronic illnesses, and especially
Yeah.
when it comes to stuff like that, especially like autoimmune diseases, there's a huge umbrella under that.
Yeah, and you have a positive ANA test, so you might
Yeah.
have an autoimmune disease that we just haven't discovered yet. But the thing I was trying to relate to you on is this idea of food being limited. And when you know you can't have certain types of foods, it becomes sort of like evil. And food is life. So when food becomes evil, and if you are having a hard time figuring out which avenue of food is the evil avenue and you aren't sure, and you know that eating can cause you pain, which is the exact situation that you're in, where you have this like complete lack of certainty around what is happening, which food is causing this. So then food in general sort of becomes the enemy. But if you don't eat, you don't live. So that puts you in this like horrifically anxiety-inducing scenario. I mean, I have days where I'm hungry, I'm exhausted, I don't have time to cook, and that's the only safe way for me is to prepare my own food. I have to order food, and I will just have paralysis. Like I will be looking through, Grubhub, just like, okay, this looks good, but I don't know the ingredients in this gluten-free crust on this pizza, and it might have, a fermented ingredient because sometimes gluten-free bread does, but I can't see the ingredients list on this, so maybe I'll go to a different restaurant. Okay, well, this thing looks good, but it doesn't let me customize what comes on it, and I know that, this cheese is aged, and that's going to flare me up, and I can't get that off the pizza, so okay, let's go to a different restaurant. And then after half an hour of that, I'll be like, I'm not going to eat. I'm desperate to eat. I'm starving. And it's extremely frustrating and anxiety inducing. If you have any sort of like eating disorder, that is going to set it off like so hard. So that's a little talked about, incredibly difficult part of dealing with all sorts of chronic illnesses that have any sort of, food component.
Yeah, and I'm like sitting over here cheesing. I don't mean to be smiling so much, but that's exactly what I go through on a day-to-day basis, like what you were describing, and nobody really gets that. I mean, even what has happened with me is I've figured out what foods are like safe foods, which I don't like saying, but I figured out what foods don't flare me for sure. And then I get stuck eating those over and over and over and over and over again. And so whenever I have to branch out or someone invites me out to dinner, my friends want to go out to dinner, my family wants to go out to dinner, I am very like paralyzed. I'll get there and I will start being anxious and I will start not really having a panic attack anymore, but I used to. But it would freak me out that I'm like, well, if I eat this, like, okay, well, if I eat this, I'm just staying home today. So it's okay if I'm in pain. I could sit in my bed with my heating pad. I could take an aspirin. That'll be okay. But if I'm going out tonight, instead, I have a concert to go to, or my sister's performing somewhere or something, I can't eat this because what if 2 hours from now I'm in pain? And so I get very stuck in these loops and these cycles, which is what happens with the like restrictiveness of it. But yeah, I mean, then there's so much thought, and a lot of people that are more like able-bodied, they don't have to think about food sometimes as much as people with autoimmune or chronic illnesses have to think about food. It's like a second nature to everybody, but you're kind of like, you have to all of a sudden rethink like walking down the stairs, just something that might possibly flare you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's horrible. It's terrible.
It's fine. It makes life interesting.
But yeah, we're both smiling because it is, it's just nice to talk to someone else who has a similar experience and can know what you're talking about. And I'm so lucky with my diagnosis, and I have found this hack with MCAS that I think I got from the podcast, and I'm trying to remember now where it came from, and I can't remember. But if I can cheat on my diet if I take a Benadryl first, and Benadryl is like not good for you, so I try not to do this more than once a week. But if I take a Benadryl first and then have a food with a higher level of histamine than I can normally tolerate, oftentimes I'll have no reaction at all, which is really exciting. I wish that was the case from the huge mountain of medication I'm taking all day, every day. But all of that is just stabilizing me enough to not be, stuck in bed all day. And I have to eat on this diet, this low histamine diet with all the medication. But every once in a while I can cheat. So, if I'm going somewhere where I don't have control over the food, I can take one Benadryl and then I can cheat and be okay, which is like huge. I mean, that's like such a lucky thing. The low histamine diet is nice because it's not a no histamine diet, it's a low histamine diet. And there's things you can do to mitigate that, which is really exciting. So, but then it's like this weird mental wiring of, I don't eat this food. This is a no food for me. And I still never eat fermented foods, even with the Benadryl. That's not enough. I've tried. I can't drink at all.
Yeah.
Like I had a Benadryl and went to an Italian restaurant and I had some wine and I really regretted it. Like that's still not enough. But the fact that I have a little bit of flexibility has been so good because the rigidity around food has been very damaging to my relationship with food. So yeah, I really feel for you on that level as well. So frustrating.
Yeah, that kind of used to be me. And I know you like touched on it earlier, and that kind of used to be me too. Whenever I was really sick, my doctor actually, I'm not going to disclose his name because I'm in Texas, but my doctor closed the door and recommended, he asked if I had ever tried medical marijuana. And I said no. And he was like, okay, well, I really recommend you do because it helps with pain and it helps with appetite. And that was what they wanted. I was so low weight that it was not looking good at all. And it was very much so like, we just need you to eat something. And so for a year of my life, I attribute a lot of my recovery. It was kind of like a Benadryl for you. I could kind of eat whatever I wanted. And then if I took a couple of hits after, I would feel so much better because my pain would go away and then I would be hungry a few minutes later, and it would distract my brain long enough away from the pain that I was feeling after eating that I didn't really feel the pain, because if I went a couple hours after, then I felt okay. And so it was just this cycle of that. And so that really, I attribute a lot of my recovery to that, but because I'm in Texas, I can't really disclose that, but yeah. I do.
Yeah, that's so important. We're huge fans of medicinal marijuana on this podcast.
I've learned, okay, good, I'm glad. I've learned that in the chronic illness community that it's a big thing, especially for pain management. It's the only thing that's really
It's all I had for the 6 years that I was severely flared, and I used it pretty much every day, which, I wish that we had more research around daily use. We're starting to get it now that it's been decriminalized in certain ways. We still need, federal decriminalization would allow us to have federal research grants going out about the long-term use of cannabis, which we really need to have. And I do feel like there was a long-term detriment that I started to experience in my own body, which I feel like people are sort of like all or nothing with cannabis, where you can never have it. It's a evil, horrible drug, reefer madness type style thing, or it's a miracle drug and it cures cancer and it does everything, and neither are true. So there's something in the middle that is true, and it is so helpful for certain chronic illnesses. And for me, when I would have had absolutely no life at all for those 6 years that I was super flared without cannabis. It brought joy to my life. It gave me enough functionality to podcast or just to sit up, Yes. Otherwise I'm just lying down all day. So it gave me just enough to meet my wife. We fell in love, and I had just enough life in me from cannabis to do that, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I owe it a lot, and I thank it a lot. And it was the only pain management I had for years. And then when I got on MCAS meds, my relationship to cannabis changed completely, and I had to go off of it completely for a long time. Just to kind of clear my system out and allow the MCAS meds to work. And at first, there was a weird issue happening between the two, where once I was being stabilized from medication, if I were to use cannabis, it would make me worse and flare me. It was very strange. And I'm a couple years out from that now, and I'm now at a place where I can use it recreationally again. And it's so different. Recreational cannabis versus medical cannabis are completely different things. And if you're feeling so awful and you smoke a little bit of weed, and it brings you back towards feeling normal. Whereas if you're feeling normal and you smoke a little weed, you're high. It's a very different experience. Okay, let's talk about the history of this. So you said it started when you're 20 and you're 24 now. So 4 years of medical nightmare going down.
Yeah.
What happened when this first started, and what was your reaction when this first started to happen to you?
I know exactly when it started because it was New Year's of 2020, I believe. It was New Year's of 2020. And I made the joke because 2020 was COVID. And so I kept making the joke I'm going to make it out of this year unscathed. And then the universe just whacked me upside the head. And I had a couple weird tiny flares every once in a while. I was living with an old boyfriend at the time. And so we were eating, and I would kind of have some problems after. I'd feel nauseous, which is really uncommon for me. I've never really had that. And it would be just randomly, or I would start to feel anxious about something, kind of have a panic attack. It wasn't a healthy relationship at all. So I would have anxiety about being in the relationship, and that would cause me some pain, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it was very manageable, just tiny here and there once every couple weeks. And I was just like, oh, that's weird. And I just attribute it to maybe I have the flu, maybe I have some virus or something. And then like New Year's Eve, I was over at my mom's house celebrating New Year's, and it was just like a bus hit me on the side of the head. And all of a sudden I was super nauseous. I was feeling sick. I was in pain, and it did not go away for a year almost. It was crazy. And that's something else that people don't talk about a lot with chronic illnesses, is like it can happen to literally anybody, and there's no telling or anything. Sometimes it just happens all of a sudden. You wake up one day and you're like, whoa, something is not right. But yeah, it was just an incredible. I was like over the toilet all night. I was convinced something was wrong. And thank goodness my mom, having an autoimmune condition, she has Sjogren's, and she went through the whole process of being diagnosed. It took her like 7 or 8 years. And so luckily my mother's very much so like, something is wrong, we're going to get you checked out. And I was in and out of emergency rooms. It was also peak COVID. And because it was peak COVID and people were still in hospitals, I was told several times I would have been admitted, but they were full. And someone like me, it was okay, where I was like, I'm going to be in pain here, I'm going to be in pain there. And they could tell that it was probably not going to be a short process for them to figure out what was going on. So they just kind of sent me home with some pain management medication and said, we'll figure it out later, basically. But I had to move back in with my mom. I had to put college on hold. Like I said, I was pursuing a psychology degree, and had to put that on hold. And pretty much my life just stopped, which was really weird. I was going out like a normal 20-year-old. Right before that, I was having a good time partying. I was into raves and concerts. And then overnight, all of a sudden, I was living at home with my mom. And because I developed the eating disorder from it, in the process of all this, also, I was on so many medications that I was asleep all the time because, not to get too deep, but it was like, I did not like being awake because it meant that I was in pain, and it meant that I would have to deal with this, and I'd have to hear people tell me that nothing was wrong. And so I developed like an anxiety about going to sleep, and I would have a panic attack while going to sleep because it meant I would have to wake up again. And I didn't like that. So I spent a lot of my, I know I don't, not mean to get dark here, but that's what it was. That's what it went through. And I was always a super optimistic person, and dare I say a little bit naive. And so it was kind of a total switch all of a sudden to just be like, no one's believing me, something's wrong, I don't understand this. But because of that, I developed the eating disorder at the time, and I just didn't eat anything for like 6 weeks except sips of protein shakes and a couple crackers here and there. And I ended up losing like 35 pounds. I got down to 85 pounds, and I was struggling. Different parts of my body were shutting down. I didn't have a menstrual cycle. My bladder wasn't working anymore. I had to basically go through potty training all over again with my mom. And wow. It was a lot. And people ask me, like, and I've talked about it a lot in therapy, thank goodness. And people ask like how I felt at the time. And because my body was so sick, my brain didn't really register that I was so sick because I was literally in starvation mode. So I felt like no emotions whatsoever the whole time because my body was so focused on just like staying alive. And it wasn't until after really then I started having all the emotions once I kind of recovered a little bit from that. Then all of a sudden it hit me that I was like, whoa, the doctors told my mom like I might not make it. Like it was just all of a sudden like that really happened. I can't believe that happened. And so bless whoever's heart, I was misdiagnosed with ulcerative colitis. I was misdiagnosed with gastroparesis, all these things that it wasn't, which of course you have to get a test that says you're diagnosed, and then you have to get another test that says you're misdiagnosed. So I was testing left and right for everything. And by some grace of the universe, I started to recover a little bit. My doctor looked me straight in the eye one time once I started to recover, and he said, without whatever it was coming back, we'll probably never figure out what made you so sick in the first place, which I was okay with because at the time I thought that it might just be a one-off, like it was just a weird virus or something. I would recover and be back to normal. Cut to 4 years later, I'm still dealing with it. But I ended up gaining a lot of the weight back. I was almost fully weight restored. My mental health was okay. I was dealing with PTSD from all of that. I would get a sniffle, like a cold, and I would have a panic attack because I would freak out that all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, or like I would eat something that didn't agree with my stomach and I would freak out that I'm like, this is it. Like I'm going to be sick again and I'm going to almost lose my life. And I would freak out about it. And I ended up, like I said, almost making a full recovery. And then in 2022, I was exposed to the flu virus at the end of the year at a Halloween party. And instead of just getting a normal flu virus, it decided to attack my colon, which I've since learned is like an autoimmune thing, is whenever you get a virus, it attacks a certain part of your body as opposed to just getting the flu like a normal person. And it attacked my colon. And because I'd been in so much pain with my stomach before, I was taking a leave on a daily basis, which I didn't know you're not supposed to do because it's an NSAID. And so that was already kind of tearing away at my colon a little bit. And I was diagnosed with colitis in the hospital. I was in like, I don't wish it on my worst enemy. It was the worst pain ever. I've heard people say it's very similar to childbirth. It was not fun pain whatsoever. And after that is kind of when the emotions really hit, because after I got colitis and I was kind of having to go through everything again and I lost all my weight that I had gained back, that's when it kind of hit me. And my doctors, kind of said, this is probably going to have to be something that you're dealing with for the rest of your life. And that's whenever I was diagnosed with kind of depression, because it was just a really hard pill to swallow that all of a sudden you're like, oh, I'm probably going to be sick for the rest of my life. And now I've made it on the other side of that where I'm okay with it. But at the time, being told that at 22, it was really hard, especially when they were like, we don't know what it is, but we know you're probably going to be dealing with this for a long time. And so I lost a lot of hope and all this stuff and fun stuff. But since I saw a therapist after that, I was very lucky. I opened up to my parents about how I was feeling and that I was in a really dark place. And they pushed me to get into therapy. And my therapist and my psychiatrist put me on some right medication. And now I'm feeling a lot better. But I didn't feel emotionally a type of way until afterwards, which was really interesting.
That happened to me too. I relate to that so much. Yeah. When I first had my first like severe can't go to work, can't do anything flare up was in my early 20s for a year. And when it first started, I had no idea what was going on. I had full confidence in doctors and I was sort of nonplussed about the whole thing. And also I was having all these muscle spasms. They gave me Ativan and I was having all this pain. They gave me Tramadol. And that's a very potent combination. I was barely present as a human, I wasn't even that upset about anything. I had very little emotion about any of it. I was like, I just got to be patient. And then they couldn't figure me out. We did piece together that there was a mold issue in the house I was living in. And when I got out of the house, I started to get better. And this was an MCAS symptom and we didn't know at the time. We thought it was just a mold allergy. And once I realized that I had to leave, and that's actually when I moved to Seattle, because I was like, well, I got to start over, so I might as well start over in a new place. That's when I started to have to deal with the emotional aspect of it, is after I started to get better, after I stopped living in that house, started to recognize what I'd lost, started to recognize that, oh my God, I was just like underwater for 6 months and, barely doing anything and barely present. Barely conscious, super drugged up the whole time, and none of these doctors believe me. That's when I started to face my first medical gaslighting. I saw this mold expert who told me that this was like psychosomatic and that I needed psychotherapy to train me to not react to mold anymore. And I was like, you're an asshole. Like, that's stupid. And he was wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sometimes I was told it was more like whenever your brain is sick too, if your body's sick, your brain is sick. And so it's not until you're more on the healthy side or you actually have a chance to think about it and you're like, whoa, that actually happened. Like that wasn't just something that in my life, like, cause I'm really quick to dismiss a lot of things. So I'll just be like, I make jokes all the time. Like, oh yeah, I almost died. Like, don't worry about it. But then it's like, once you start thinking about it, you're like, whoa, wait a minute. That was a huge thing my body went through. So good. Yeah. I'm glad to know that's not just me. Because for a long time, I thought it was weird that my body reacted. I wasn't really upset the first time going through it. I was just like trying to get through it.
Yeah. And I haven't heard that often. I'm trying to remember if anyone else has ever talked about it on the podcast and I can't think of it, but that is a very real thing that I went through as well. So I really enjoyed hearing you talk about it.
Okay, good.
Which is
I was like, I don't know.
It's so funny, like talking about these things that are so traumatic and I'm just like smile on my face and loving every second of it. I also just want to say I appreciate you sharing the emotional struggles that you went through, because that is so real as well. A huge part of living with chronic illness.
Yeah, and I don't hear a lot of people talk about that. And that's why I like it's a big part of it too. Because people talk a lot about the physicality of whenever you have a chronic illness and like your physical symptoms, because that's, what's persistent. But it's also like it can be hard every single day to be like, okay, no, I know that this might be coming and I have to prep for it. And you just kind of have to be like, well, you might get better and you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And it's probably going to be something the rest of your life. So it's more like a manageable thing. And like I said, I'm lucky now that I'm on the opposite side where I'm okay with it. And I'm like, if this is what I have to do, this is what I have to do. That's fine by me. And the whole time I was sick, I did want to say, the whole time I was sick, I was telling myself, and I would tell my mom, I'm like, if I can help just one person after this, it will have all made it worth it. And I was luckily interviewed a couple years ago with my doctor, and we were talking about this. And he shared with me that since then, he's had a lot of young women and a lot of young people come in presenting the same symptoms saying, oh, we saw the interview and we wanted to come in and say this. I have people reach out to me on social media all the time that are like, hey, I saw your interview from 3 years ago because I was just diagnosed with this and I looked it up on YouTube. And people will reach out and be like, what have you done? What's been helping you? Like, how are you doing now? And so it's bittersweet. I hate to say, see other people going through it, but when I was first going through it, I felt so alone being so young going through something like that. And so I was like, no, I'm always going to shout it from the rooftops. I'm going to talk about it.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm so impressed that you're 4 years into this journey and already having these huge revelations about how you want to live and how you want to exist inside of this journey. And it sounds like you have a great therapist, and it sounds like you're pursuing this with your full heart and going after an answer, which I also know is exhausting. And it just sounds like you're doing an awesome kick-ass job of living through this hard thing.
That's great to hear. I definitely went a couple of years whenever like the last 2 years. It wasn't really until this year that I started kind of trying to seek out an answer again. Like I said, I gaslit myself and I was scared to go back to a doctor to tell me nothing was wrong. And so for the last 2 years, kind of in between 2022 and the beginning of 2024-ish, I was kind of like staying away from doctor's offices. And I was like, it's fine. I'll just deal with this. Like, I don't want to know what it is. It's okay. And then this year was really whenever I was like, no, I do want to figure this out. And it has been disheartening still hearing some no's. And I'm still kind of struggling with the thought of there might be more tests in the future that I hear a no from, but I'm at least now like, no, I deserve more than just we don't know.
Yeah, totally. And that's also 100% normal and okay and expected to go in and out of pursuing an answer because it's so frustrating and horrible and exhausting and you get so many no's. You got to take a break sometimes. You have to be kind to yourself and you have to recognize what balance you need of when you search and when you break. Because I gave up for years and and then went back to it again after I recharged. And then I got it, the last time. But I went through, like 2 or 3 different diagnostic processes that took like years at a time at different medical centers and kept coming up empty at the end of that with doctors not wanting to ever see me again or even cutting off care. Telling me that I was crazy, telling me that I needed to go to a psychotherapist. Like I got psychological evaluation after psychological evaluation in order to keep getting care, and then they still ran out of ideas. It's awful. It's so depressing, and it just makes you want to give up. It makes you feel like you'd be better off without doctors. And then I got worse, and then I went back and tried it again, and I did it. I got there. It's one of the greatest victories of my entire life. I was 38 years old. And I've been dealing with issues on and off my entire life. My first issues were in 2nd grade.
Wow.
And I got it at 38.
That weirdly gives me hope. And I know that's crazy to say, and I hate to say that, but it weirdly gives me hope that I'm like, okay, something's out there. And that's what I always make the joke that I'm like, I know one day they're going to figure this out and it's just going to be like, oh, that's what it was all along. Like, duh. It'll be like my gallbladder will give out and they'll take it out and I'll feel like $1 million. And all of a sudden it'll be like, oh, that's what was the problem. Or we'll find out I have fibromyalgia or something that they'll be like, oh, that's what it is. So I'm looking forward. And if that never happens, I've also learned that that's okay. And I can live with this. I've lived with this for this long. If this is how the rest of my life has to be, that's fine. I have a fantastic life as it is. And I can, knock on wood, as of right now, manage the symptoms.
Yeah. And that's the best place to be in. That's amazing. I mean, the best place to be in is out of pain and to have a diagnosis. But as far as where you're at, your attitude,
our normal.
yeah, as far as where you're at right now, your attitude around it is amazing and very admirable.
Taking a long time to get there.
Yeah, well, this has obviously changed you pretty dramatically in 4 years. And it sounds like in a lot of ways for the better. I mean, I'm hearing that you're learning to advocate for yourself. You're learning to, self-regulate inside of this maelstrom, which is, I mean, that's like level 10 difficulty self-regulation, right? What are the ways that you have noticed in yourself that this has changed you for the better?
That's such a huge question. It's interesting if you talk to literally anybody in my life, they will say that I'm a completely different person. Like I said, I was always a super optimistic kid. I was a super optimistic. I felt invincible. Nothing could ever touch me. And I was very optimistic about the world and everything is great and nothing is ever wrong and happiness, sunshine, butterflies. And I feel like I look at life a lot more realistic now, which isn't a bad thing by any means. It's not that I look at it, through rose-colored glasses anymore. I also have learned to protect my health. That's what I've learned is a big thing also. Manage my anxiety is a huge one because, like I said, I was in a very unhealthy relationship and that was spurring all this and making it worse. And so I've learned kind of also to put myself first, which I hate saying. I was always a put other people first person, but a lot of times with your health, and especially when you struggle with your health, you kind of have to put yourself first. I've learned also to talk about it. That makes it a lot easier to deal with, especially the PTSD of it all. It makes it a lot easier if you keep reliving it over and over in your head. It kind of takes away the evilness of what happened and the scariness of what happened, and that it's just something else that happened for you. I don't know.
Yeah, wow. How has this impacted your personal relationships? You've mentioned this toxic relationship in the past, and I believe you said you have a boyfriend now. And
yes.
Dating inside a chronic illness, that's a whole show in and of itself.
Oh my goodness. I have had, and I make this joke all the time that I've dated people that have not cared at all about this and that are just don't care at all. And they're very much so like, oh, you're fine. Nothing's wrong. I've dated people that care too much about this where every single thing I eat, they're like, are you okay? Is this going to be okay? Which makes me worse in my head. I've dated a wide gamut of people, and it is really, really hard, especially whenever I was first going through this when I was younger, because you can't expect another 20-year-old really to know about this and kind of experience what you're going through and kind of be like, hey, no, I went through this, near-death experience. Basically, I went through this huge thing. It's hard to get other people to understand that. And so almost for the last year, I've kind of put off dating because I wanted to put myself and put my career first. And so I've kind of put off dating. And the person I'm with now is a really, really good mix of both. They care, but they also don't care too much. And they push, but they don't push too much, which is really good for someone like me who's stuck in routines. And so it's really a nice balance. I've learned exactly who I need in a partner also through going through this. Like I need someone who will kind of knock me out of my routine a little bit, who will push me on trying different foods, but who, if I say no twice, they won't keep pushing. It's also, my friends are really good. I used to be someone that had a ton of friends, and I used to think that you needed quantity over quality of friends, like you needed more friends than ever. And then whenever I got sick, I know you mentioned earlier, when I got sick, I kind of went into my turtle shell and I didn't tell anybody except my immediate family. I just kind of pulled out of all social engagements for about 6 or 7 months, and nobody knew why, except literally my immediate family. And I was, shrouded in privacy. I didn't want anybody to know. And once I kind of came on the other side of that, I learned that it's more quality of friends. You don't need 1 million friends if you have 5 really good friends. And so that's what I've learned too, is to hold those people close. And they're very great. Well, they'll come over here and they'll meet me where I'm at. We don't have to go out and eat. They don't, we don't go to concerts or anything. They'll come over here. We'll have a chill night in. And so I don't know, maybe that's just growing up too, that all of a sudden I'm like, I don't need to go out and have a crazy night on the town anymore. Like, I say being 24 years old. I mean, I get it, but I don't know. It's helped. It's helped a lot. I look at my family differently because I've learned that this also didn't just affect me. It affected my family. Mm-hmm. I know it was hard for my mom to hear some things. I know it was harder for my younger sister to watch me go through this too. And so I've learned that it's not just me. I appreciate everybody a little more, and I am extremely grateful for everybody that's in my life that has stuck around for this long. And I always make the joke, I'm the friend that anytime somebody cancels, I'm very much so okay with it. Anytime someone cancels on plans, people are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I canceled. I'm like, no, I'm chronically ill. I cancel all the time. You're good. Like, I can't, you can't plan ahead or anything. So
Yeah, absolutely. That's the lifestyle.
yeah.
I'm curious. So I know that I was at a point when I started this podcast where I really didn't want, something I was worried about talking about this publicly was people coming at me all the time being like, oh, have you thought about this? Have you tried this? Do you want to do that? Have you tried yoga? We all know how frustrating that is. But I'm curious, doing this podcast today, for people listening, if anyone is listening to this and like, oh, that sounds like me, or oh, that sounds like this disease, is that the sort of thing that you're interested in? We can filter it through me. People can email me, majorpainpodcast@gmail.com, and let me know, like, hey, I listened to Danny's episode and I had this thought. Is that something you're interested in at all?
I'm actually highly interested in that. I'm very interested. And I'm willing to knock at anything. I'm the type that I will bring a notepad to my doctor's office and I'll be like, okay, have we checked for this? I was the one that brought up the endometriosis. And then my OBGYN was like, oh yeah, maybe that's what it is. So sometimes you got to hear somebody else. And also, if other people, if you think that it might be this, there are a lot of things also that are symptoms that you don't know are symptoms until somebody else says it. And you're like, oh, I do deal with that. And so that's what I would be more than open to that. If anybody has any idea what it is.
Awesome. Okay. Well, listeners, having heard Danny's story, if this resonates with you, if you have any ideas, hit me up. majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. I will forward those along to Danny. I have one more question for you. So if you could hop in a time machine, because we both love sci-fi, if you could hop in a time machine and go back to 2020, New Year's Eve, and bring a message to yourself from the future, don't have to worry about, John Connor, Sarah Connor breaking the timeline rules. This is not a Back to the Future scenario. This is just, the timeline's going to be fine, but you can bring yourself one piece of information from the future about what you're about to go through. One word of advice. What would it be?
Ooh, oh my gosh, I've never thought about this before. And I'm not going back in time to date my mom, is what you're saying.
No.
With the Back to the Future. So if I'm not doing that, if I had to bring one piece of advice, I don't know. I hate to do the cheesy, like, you'll be okay, because I remember just feeling like I would never be okay. It felt like it was never ending. And so I hate to say that, but maybe I would say, like, it's going to be a long road ahead. Just kind of prep you for that. Like, it's going to be a long road ahead, but you're going to be a totally different person and you're going to love that person on the other side. Because truth of the matter is, I feel like I always say that I have a connection with butterflies. I have butterfly rings. I have butterfly everything, because I was a fine caterpillar before, and then I got sick and I went into my cocoon, and now I'm a butterfly, which is also fine, like slightly upgraded. And so I always say I was fine before and I was a fine human being, but I really like who I am now, even though it's definitely changed me in several different ways.
Wow. Yeah, incredible answer. And my wife also is very connected to butterflies. We have a lot of them in our home because of that. Artwork, not real ones, which she would prefer, but that's, much more complicated. You got to be at 80 degrees all the time, and it's just too hot for me. So, but I say the same thing all the time, that I like the person I am better now than I did before, because of the way I've been challenged, and it strips you down. You have to figure out who you are from scratch, because you can't do the things you thought you wanted to do. And you can come out of it with a better, stronger sense of self and a deeper sense of liking yourself and knowing yourself. And it can kind of give you a leg up on being happy, even though you have to live in all of this pain. It's a very strange phenomenon, but I love hearing it from other people, because I've lived that, and I think that that's a really powerful message to take from all of this. Danny, you have done an incredible job today. This has been so fun. What a great conversation. I just love doing this. Yeah, me too. I'm so thrilled that we were able to record this and get to share this with other people. I'm so excited to share your story. I hope that there's information out there from our audience that can be helpful. And I just really want to stay in touch and find out what happens. If you make any progress in your diagnostic journey, please let us know. We do catch-up episodes once a year where we hear from some people that have been on the show before, and I'd love to include you in that. Yeah. And also, I'm sure that some of our community is going to want to connect with you online. So please tell us if you have anything you want to plug, any social media, anything at all that you'd like to share.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So my personal Instagram, if anybody, again, everyone needs to reach out if they're feeling a type of way. I'm more than okay for people to reach out. And just if you need to vent to me, I totally understand. My personal Instagram is Danni, DANNI _AYE, because my middle name starts with an A. So it's Danni A. And then my bakery, if anybody ever is curious about my bakery, it's called Foodie with Da Booty because my initials are DA. I know. I thought about it and then I could not use it. It was one of those. So it's Foodie with Da Booty. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Google, all that fun stuff as well.
Amazing. Well, I'm so thrilled to have featured you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Just an absolute joy of an episode. And I just want to reiterate that I'm so impressed with the way that you are navigating this chapter in your life. And I just want to say to the doctor that told you at 22, I don't know what this is, but you have to live with it forever. Slap on the wrist. Bad job. How dare you?
I can't wait to go back in a few years and have like an I told you so to everybody.
Yeah, because, I mean, first of all, chronic illness often is a lifetime endeavor, but it is not a static one. And to be told that you're going to live with the disease forever is a very different thing than to be told, well, there's no cure for this, but there's a lot of treatments that can, greatly improve your quality of life. And you might be able to live with this harmoniously, which is what I'm doing with my own diagnosis. MCAS is not a death sentence, and it is not a sentence to live in the amount of pain that I was living in before at all. And to be told back then, oh, this is forever, without the qualification that while this may be forever, your relationship with it is going to evolve and you might be able to get to a positive, stable, happy place with it. That's a completely different message. So for a doctor to not even know what you have and then to throw out the word forever, very unfair. But the way that you have... Part of the journey. The way that you have navigated this journey so far is amazing. The progress you've made is amazing. And your outlook as you're searching for a diagnosis is awesome. From someone else who has lived that journey for years and years and years, I'm very impressed. I wish I could give you a real high five in person. I'll give you a virtual high five. And just want to say thank you for sharing your journey with us today on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having this podcast, giving people a voice to talk about this. Because I found your podcast through other people that I followed, like chronic illness influencers. I literally have seen you talk about it. And so I know that you have a voice to these people.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of Major Pain. I'm Jesse Mercury, your host and the producer of this podcast. Artwork by Egg Salad Salad. Our theme music is the song Time Machine from my synth-pop album Sci-Fi, now streaming everywhere. Support this show on social media, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Major Pain Podcast. If you have questions or comments you'd like to share with myself, our guests, or our listeners, send an email to majorpainpodcast@gmail.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about this show, support its creation, or comment on any episode at majorpainpodcast.com. Major Pain is supported by our listeners on Patreon. Thank you to our $2 per month supporters, our $7 per month patrons Naomi Adele Smith, Sonny Roberts, Kelsey Matson, Alexandria Henderson, Justin Minnick, Laura Stevens, Heather Muncie, and Robert, and our $25 per month producers Steve Kavanaugh, Chris Fowler, Trish O'Brien, and Hipster Leia. Learn how you can support this podcast while receiving special recognition on the show, gifts, and monthly bonus episodes at patreon.com/majorpainpodcasts.